Okay, good morning, everybody. We're really happy to have the great Sal Khan with us today. He's an American educator, and he founded Khan Academy, which is a free online education platform. And he has this Khan Academy is also this huge organization that's produced more than 6,500 video lessons, which cover a huge amount of academic subjects. By the way, Sal, I learned over the dinner table last night that my daughter used your videos on statistics during her stay at Columbia Business School last year. So these are widely used. In fact, they've been viewed by actually almost 2 billion times, probably more by now. In any case, he was listed as one of the 100 most influential people in the world, and Forbes put Sal on its cover with the title $1 trillion opportunity. So he's going to talk to us a little bit today about sort of the present state of what he thinks about education in the current situation, and how he thinks that there can be a kind of movement forward as to what we can learn from the pandemic.
Thanks, Martin. Well, it's great to be here, and what I hope to do is, a lot of what I've been preaching lately is, when folks are on video conference, the last thing you want is someone to just lecture at you the whole time. That might as well be a video. So I'll definitely try to keep as much time for questions and interactivity as possible. But just to get everyone up to speed, the Khan Academy, as Martin introduced, we're a not-for-profit, mission-free, world-class education for anyone, anywhere. And, there's kind of been three pillars to that. One is it's all of the K through 14 materials, core academic materials, should be available to anyone in the world, ideally in all the world's major languages. They should be able to access it in a way that's personalized, and they should be able to prove what they know, so they get access to some form of opportunity. And Khan Academy has always been focused on this notion of personalization, that every teacher knows that in a class of 30 kids, the 30 students have all different gaps, already learn at different paces, but in a traditional environment, they had to compromise and move everyone at a fixed pace. But when you move everyone at a fixed pace, you inevitably get variable outcomes. So one student gets an 80%, another student gets a 90%. Even the A student or the B student who got the 90%, what was that 10% gap? Those gaps accumulate, and at some point you get to an algebra class, you get to a calculus class, and nothing makes sense anymore. Not because the student isn't bright, not because the subject matter is difficult, but because they've accumulated too many gaps. And so this is what we've always worked on. But then you can imagine, as you go into COVID, the world needed something that was accessible, accessible both, on, from the internet, but also accessible in terms of cost. Khan Academy is free, available in multiple languages, available, covers multiple subjects and grades, can be used by teachers in a classroom setting, but also used individually by students and families. And so we saw our traffic kind of go through the roof, be about 300% of normal. And, we've just been trying to, keep things going, but even more importantly, everything that I just talked about personalization and gaps that already existed pre-COVID just got a lot worse with COVID, because a lot of middle income, upper middle income families have, it's been suboptimal for everyone. But I think a lot of, for example, our families have been doing okay. We've been able to get the supports. Our kids go to schools where they've been able to transition to distance learning quite well. We have access to devices and internet access, while a lot of folks around the world, whether it's in Brazil, United States, other places, the kind of the poorest 20 to 30%, they haven't had kind of the baseline access in a lot of cases, or the supports necessary. And so I think this, this notion of a further divergence of the haves and the have-nots is, I think, only accelerated during COVID. And what we're trying to do is everything we can to, during the crisis, keep that gap from being as small as possible. But I think more realistically, as we get out of the crisis, to help kind of the rebuilding effort, so that people do have tools to fill in gaps, remediate, so that not too many kids really fall off of their pathway to doing well. So I'll stop talking. That's kind of the high level bullet points of where we are or how we're thinking about things.
Let me start with the following question. That one of the interesting things when you wrote in the New York Times was that you thought that this was, you realized the sort of add-on aspect of your tremendous file of lessons, but you also seem to say, and you founded your own school, an face-to-face school, that in fact it requires really good teachers in order to be able to identify those gaps and then to help the kids get to your stuff.
That's right. And I'll be the first to, I'm often associated as kind of like the poster child for online learning and this and that, and sometimes by association, distance learning. But I'll be the first person to say, if I had to pick between an amazing teacher and amazing technology, I'd pick the amazing teacher every time. And also that distance learning, pure distance learning is not optimal for the great majority of students. And so even pre-COVID, our point of view has never been technology as a replacement for a teacher. It's all about how does technology act as a tool or a support of a teacher so that they can better reach those students with all those different gaps. And so even pre-COVID, we've always thought about, ideally a teacher lets students use Khan Academy. You mentioned the videos, but a lot of our resources are actually on the practice and the assessment component of Khan Academy. Kids get as much practice as they need. They get the feedback. They have the videos there if they need that help. And then the teacher can monitor all of that in real time, well before the kids have to take the test. And then the teachers can do more focused interventions, the types of things that only a live human being can do. Now, when COVID hit, we saw that, as I mentioned, tons of people started to use Khan Academy asynchronously, learning at their own time and pace. A lot of teachers around the world kind of just, messaged all their students is like, use Khan Academy until we figure out what's going on. But the other big gap that formed was the synchronous side of learning. I was fortunate, as you mentioned, I helped start a school that's underneath our offices where my 3 kids go. And it's a tech savvy school. The school has always been focused on student agency. The teachers never viewed themselves as lecturers and always viewed themselves as kind of advisors and guides and for the students. And so, this school, they didn't miss a beat when they had to close because of COVID. The kids immediately picked up. They had their goals. They had their video conference sessions with their teachers. They were able to do their asynchronous work at their own time and pace. But it was very clear last spring that that was the exception, not the norm. And we saw a lot of students, families, schools, teachers kind of struggle with that in-person component. And what we've been doing, there's really twofold. We've been trying to give a viewpoint of what a good holistic distance learning situation can look like, fully recognizing that it's suboptimal relative to being in person. There's some things that actually could be opportunities, but some of the main principles are make it as interactive as possible. Do not lecture, use breakouts every 10, 20, 30 minutes, depending on the age of the student. Just do something as kind of an icebreaker mixer, close your eyes and draw a picture of an elephant and share it with people, because this is a student's main social connection. Be creative about the use of time and space. Instead of 60 minutes with 30 kids, why not 10 minutes at a time with 5 kids each? So you can, once again, get more personalization. Simultaneously, I kind of spawned up another not-for-profit that's really built on top of everything that Khan Academy offers. And this is called schoolhouse.world. And this is, something that I've always wanted to do. But COVID was the thing that said this has to happen sooner than later, which is you can get your practice on Khan Academy, you can get your video instruction, and you can read articles, do all that at your own time and pace on Khan Academy. But then to complement that on Schoolhouse, you can also get free live group tutoring. Anyone on the planet can go actually right now and get free live group tutoring. These are small groups. So a lot of these are 4 or 5 people at a time with high quality vetted volunteer tutors. And so, I'm just trying to do everything, and we're trying to do everything we can to fill in all of the gaps while also, outside of the traditional system, while also trying to support the traditional system as well as possible.
I'll just ask you one short question. Are you doing similar stuff parallel in Brazil? I know you have a your second largest operation there, but um, this kind of stuff that's really about add-ons, and even have you considered even doing a nonprofit of training teachers to use your stuff better? I mean, add-on training, professional development for teachers.
Well, there's two things. So, simple answer is yes. So, Khan Academy, we have actually over pre-COVID, over the last 2, 3 years, a big part of what we've been doing is, tens of millions of students use us every month, hundreds of thousands of teachers. But we realize, and we've had really promising efficacy studies around the world. There's over 50 studies done on Khan Academy. We're probably the most studied ed tech platform out there, just because we're so easy for researchers to get access to, and we're used a lot, so it's relevant to study it. But we realize if we really want to reach every student, we have to work more formally with school districts. And so over the last 2, 3 years, we've been working with districts. And when we went to the districts, they said, look, this makes sense. It looks like this could really improve our students' outcomes, but we need better support. We need better training. We need integration with our student information systems, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a muscle that we've been building, especially on the kind of the support training side. We've been trying to build that globally. To your point, for those who don't know, br.khanacademy.org, it is almost at parity with our with English Khan Academy. So it's very functional on K through calculus math, but also goes into the sciences and other subjects. And then stuff like the Schoolhouse project. This is accessible already by folks around the world. And we started it assuming that it would be primarily English instruction, although we didn't constrain it to English instruction. But we've already seen some of the group tutoring sessions happen in other languages. I don't think we've had a Portuguese one yet, but maybe as the word spreads, we'll start to see some of that.
Okay, Sal, let me, there's a couple of questions that were posted, and let me just kind of bring in one, and then, and this is just meant, this is from Fabio. It's complementing Martin's question, and considering that presenting a topic does not necessarily equate to teaching it, how do you ensure that instructors become educators?
Yeah, I mean, you could view that several different ways. So I agree. There's the explaining in kind of a lecture format, and there's folks who give very good lectures, but at the end of the day, there's actually a good learning science that people actually just can't pay attention for 60 minutes straight. Like, people need breaks. So it was a blessing even when I was making some of these first lessons for my family on YouTube, that at the time YouTube had a 10-minute limit, and it kind of forced me to chunk up what I might have done in 30 or 40 minutes, kind of just modeling the type of lectures that I had grown up with. And it forced me to chunk things down into 8, 9, 10 minutes. And if anything, we've been trying to not skip things, but chunk it down into even 5, 6 minutes at a time. But that's only one, to Fabio's point, that's only one part of the learning process. The real learning, and I think this is true of any of us, happens when you actually are practicing and getting real feedback. And that could be at your own time and pace, using, say, the practice on Khan Academy, getting that immediate feedback, which is really important. In traditional homework for kids, it's like being told to go practice, your basketball free throws at home, but you don't know whether you made any of the free throws until the next morning. That's not a good way to get feedback and adjust. So even the online tools aspect alone of being able to be in your zone of proximal development, get immediate, practice as much as you need, get immediate feedback, that makes a huge difference. But then when human beings are together, when you're with the teacher, all of the things I said are the best practices with distance learning over video conference. Those are also true when people are in the room together. It should be a dialogue. The teacher should be constantly asking the students to solve problems, constantly asking them to talk to each other, to figure out how to address it. Now, when you think about this project on Schoolhouse, which is it's small group tutoring, because of the size of it, and there is a process that we're doing around tutor evaluation, tutor coaching. It's actually pretty impressive how the volunteer community has done this. They're actually creating an entire, or they have a process where they're coaching early tutors. They're monitored by other more experienced tutors, to emphasize that this isn't a place where you lecture. If you're small group tutoring 3, 4, 5, 10 people, this is all about giving them an interesting problem to work on, having them work together on it, explain their reasoning, and that you as a tutor giving them appropriate nudges so that they can really grok the material themselves. But tutoring is one of these areas there's a ton of research, and there's one that recently came out, it was just forwarded to me, that, small group tutoring, even when it's not done by like, a super expert teacher, even when it's done by a peer who might be a month ahead of the students getting tutored, is highly, highly effective, because once again, it forces personalization and it forces engagement. If you're one of 3 or 4 in a session, you've got to engage. While when you're one of 30 or 40, you're less likely to.
One other thing that comes off of the schoolhouse, but one of the things, like when we think about things academically, one of the structures that people have proposed is that oftentimes technology is a good substitute in some scenarios, and it's a great complement in others. And one of the things that, at least we see in practice is a lot of times, especially in Brazil, we see, especially, new teachers using Khan Academy as a substitute rather than as a complement for the classroom. No, we recognize that the bar moves over time in terms of to what extent are, the kind of lessons really there to complement versus to be a substitute. Where do you think you are right now in that kind of complement to substitute? And how do you ensure or help teachers to really kind of get that extra experience where they can, and the confidence to really use it as a complement rather than a substitute?
Yeah, it's a great question. It depends on the context. And the way I view it is, I view it as a substitute for certain aspects of what goes on in a classroom, but that doesn't mean that it's a substitute for the teacher, that if anything, it liberates the teacher to do higher order tasks. And I think, then the question is, how do we train the teacher to do those higher order tasks? I think we're in a world now where, a teacher, a professor, even at a university level, kind of just giving a broadcast lecture to 30 kids, 40 kids, the university level, you'll see hundreds of kids, that doesn't make any sense anymore. And for a teacher that viewed their entire role as being a lecturer, then this might feel as a substitute. But the reality is that it should now allow the teacher to do more focused interventions with students, do more Socratic dialogue, make the classroom use the class time to have the students go into groups and do the exact things that we just talked about, work on interesting problems with each other, then come back to the larger group, talk about how they solve the problem, really make class, when some of the classes when I grew up, and I'm sure several of y'all, there's moments where the teachers made us put our fingers on our lips and it was forced passivity. I think what we all think, and there's plenty of learning science to back this up, is that you want the opposite of that in a classroom. You want engagement in the content, but true engagement, anything but active engagement, not just passively listening and looking like you're paying attention. And so the way I see it is, there are environments around the world where the teacher, and these are unfortunate environments where the teacher might not have the subject matter depth. There might not know, in certain cases, there might not be someone in the school who can even teach that material, or they might not have access to kind of really rigorous coursework. And in that cases, they might lean, Khan Academy might be a lot. In the extreme case, when a student doesn't even have access to a school, Khan Academy, our hope is that we can raise the floor with even Khan Academy alone. But the ideal is that where there is a teacher, even if the teacher does not have expertise in that subject, let's say you are in the US, you oftentimes have these unfortunate situations of like, oh, we need to find someone who can teach this. We don't have someone, let's get the gym teacher, and the gym teacher will be the person that teaches that subject. Even where there isn't the subject matter depth, Khan Academy can provide that depth for the students of the instruction, the practice. It can also, we've had teachers who, to their credit, have been secure enough to say, hey, look, I also used Khan Academy to bone up on the material, to understand how to cover the standard, to go deeper. But it didn't make sense for me to just learn it from Khan Academy and replicate the same lecture myself. What it made sense for is for me and my students to leverage Khan Academy, get that practice, get that feedback, get that instruction. And that way, when I was in person with them, I was able to do smaller group interventions, motivate the kids who weren't motivated, pair students up. If there was a student, there might've been a student in the class who knows that unit better than I do. Get that student to work with 4 or 5 of their peers to go a little bit deeper. And when we've seen, those have actually been some of the best environments that we have seen, because actually sometimes when there is an expert in the room, they oftentimes don't want to let go of certain aspects of the process. But then that keeps them from doing some of the really high value parts of the process, like the, small group interaction.
Another question from our audience. This is from Pedro Dantes. He recounts that he's had experiences trying to get teenage family members to use Khan Academy and found that their usage was low. And usually it was right when testing was going on, they would look at those things. He was trying to figure out within his own family whether monetary incentives or gifts or things to try to incentivize greater use. In terms of, more generally, you've probably seen these types of incentives out there. What have been the most effective ones at getting people to consistently use the platform?
Yeah, this is a big question. And I don't think I have figured this 100% out, because, we have a lot of evidence that if students engage, we have really strong evidence if they engage 45 minutes a week, that can dramatically accelerate their overall learning. And I know anecdotally, even with my own family members, the ones that I have been able to get to work on it 20, 30 minutes a day for 4 or 5 days a week, really form a habit around it. Pretty much every one of them, really accelerated their learning. Like, it wasn't just they went from being a B or C student to an A student. They went from being a B or C student to being 4 or 5 grade levels ahead within 2 or 3 years. So it was a dramatic improvement. So the question is, how do we get more students to engage on that level? That's what we're really trying hard to work on. We're trying to work through the districts, obviously. The more that teachers use Khan Academy as kind of a strategic part of their overall offering. Teachers are the main forcing function right now for most students to engage. So that's one outlet. But, to the question of how do you do it within a family? Yeah, I'm with my own children. For younger children, it makes a huge difference if you as the adult try to sit down with them, because from the kids' point of view, they're always eager to spend kind of time with a family member or their dad or their uncle or their cousin or whoever it might be. So I found that has been most effective with my own kids, when I'm willing to put 20 minutes a day and sit down next to them and just give them feedback whenever they get something right or wrong, or say, hey, you're having trouble, why don't you watch the video, or give them little nudges. That made a huge difference. But I'd love to learn whether the monetary or, with my 6-year-old, I sometimes bribe him with an M&M or two. I don't feel too much guilt about that, but it seems to do the trick. But I'm a big believer, kind of do anything reasonable that you feel good about that can help build the habit. And once you build the habit, the student themselves are going to it's going to feel like something they just do every day, like brushing their teeth. But then they'll also start to see the benefits. And it really takes about 2 or 3 months at that level of engagement of like 20, 30 minutes a day, that they'll start to say, wait, math is starting to look easy to me. I'm actually kind of ahead of the class. Wow, my friends are coming to me for help versus the other way around.
Hey, Sal, we got a question from a former faculty member. Early on, you got a lot of criticisms for all sorts of things, your lack of pedagogical creds, to transmission oriented. It seems like all these have been well overcome. Do you agree with that? And what, if anything, are you criticized for now? Are these valid criticisms? And if so, what are you doing about them?
Yeah, I think in the early days, some of the criticism, I think, was maybe based on kind of a misunderstanding of what we are trying to do. It's absolutely true. The video side of Khan Academy, these are micro lectures. Now, I don't think that kind of micro lectures are inherently, bad. In fact, I pretty much everyone can find a family member who said, hey, there's a time that I couldn't understand X and I went back to Khan Academy and, I found the perfect set of micro lectures that unblocked me, and then I was off to the races. So, and there's a lot of evidence that you do need some form of instruction. And, the difference between kind of a micro lesson that's kind of an on-demand video versus the 60 or 90-minute thing you get at a university or in a high school is that when you click on a 5-minute video, you're almost asking a question. You're saying, I don't understand that, and please answer it. So your brain is activated in a completely different way than when you're in a lecture hall and you're just like, all right, teacher, what are we covering today? But with that said, I think people have realized that our main energy, even though we're kind of most known for our videos, most of our resources have been on the practice side. All of these efficacy studies, they've been primarily about the practice, the feedback side. So Khan Academy has never been videos. In fact, the first videos were made as a complement to the practice, but they kind of took on a life of their own. In terms of the criticism around, this did start as a homebrew project. Me and my family, I don't have any traditional kind of pedagogical, I'm not a, I don't have a teaching certification, et cetera, et cetera. And, so it caught on by people just finding resonance with it. But, as we've grown as an organization, we've seen, and I see huge value of both folks who are coming at the pedagogy kind of with a blank slate, maybe like myself. And we have a lot of educators and a lot of education researchers who are now part of the Khan Academy team or who advise us. And we really try to get the best of both worlds, question everything from first principles, but also make sure we're very aware of state of the art and learning science and just, deep teacher experience. I think the biggest criticism we hear now is, and it's a little related to the previous question, which is Khan Academy is great, but is it only great for the motivated students? Because people see that, like, if someone is motivated, and there are these incredible stories, this young girl in Afghanistan, Taliban keeps her from going to school. She finds Khan Academy in 6th or 7th grade. She's off to the races, learns physics, chemistry, bio, calculus from Khan Academy, smuggles herself into Pakistan to take the SAT, gets political asylum in the US, and is now, her name's Sultana. She's doing quantum computing research at Tufts, right? So if someone is motivated, and I probably have several hundred stories like that. She's probably the most amazing, but of those, and then, what immediately people say is, that's amazing. That Sultana might have been just stuck in that village in Afghanistan, if not for Khan Academy. But wow, she was hyper motivated. So, okay, check. Khan Academy is great. If someone is motivated, it is a lifeline for them. But what about for what people would call classically demotivated students? And people tend to, and I disagree with this, but people tend to conflate demotivation with low income or under-resourced groups and all of these things. And what I say is, you need at your baseline, you need the tools so that if someone does engage, they can grow. That's step one. And I think, especially in things like math, Khan Academy is already quite good at that, although it has a long way to go. There's a lot of places where it can improve. So the question really then becomes, it then becomes, how do you motivate as many students as possible to use it at kind of recommended dosage? And so that's why we are putting this energy into working with school systems and working with school districts around the world, because we think that's one avenue to getting to as many kids to engage with it. We also think one of the reasons why a lot of kids seem demotivated is because they've accumulated so many of these gaps that, by the time, if we took any of us and we were just thrown into an advanced quantum computing class, all of us would appear demotivated because it wouldn't make sense to us. But if you allow students to fill in the gaps, so if we had all of our prerequisites for quantum computing, all of us would be highly engaged. And I think that's true for every student. When you go to an algebra class, the kid who looks checked out, it's because they don't have the gaps filled in. But if they did, they'll be highly engaged. So we're working with school districts on that. And we're also trying to do anything we can on the Khan Academy side, when we reach students directly, to just making it as engaging as possible. The game mechanics work as well as possible. This is where some of that schoolhouse effort around tutoring, the community aspect of live engagement, we also think is important.
Now, I don't know what your timing is. Eduardo, I've put on as a panelist. Eduardo, if you can come off mute and ask your question, we appreciate it. If not, I can just go with the question that was on there. So the question that Eduardo posted was, right now, Brazil's, like many other countries, they've suspended classrooms. They've gone to, what's been hard is because of the infrastructure problems, it's been hard to go to virtual schools in many cases. And now, to the extent that schools are coming back, it's very limited in the number of hours. And one of the things that, Eduardo asked was, how would you help drive the recovery, and what advice would you have to public officials so that as they're kind of coping with already the fact that they have very limited classrooms, how could you actually augment what they're doing in meaningful ways, given a place with less infrastructure?
Yeah, and most of my solutions are going to be based on some technological infrastructure. So I mean, step one, and I'm, globally, the more that government, corporations, philanthropists can do to close the digital divide, make sure people have access to a reasonable device and internet, ideally at home, but if not at home, at someplace else, during COVID, to do it in a safe way. But I also think a lot of this is going to happen post COVID, when we're kind of in reconstruction mode, or disaster recovery mode. And there, assuming that we can get some access to most kids post COVID, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's at a library, whether it's at or a computer lab, or at home, this is where Khan Academy is, available in Brazilian Portuguese. They can have every student work on what we call the get ready for grade level course. So let's say you're a student who would be in the equivalent of 6th grade. We have a get ready for 6th grade course, and we have this in all of the major languages. And that get ready for 6th grade course has all of the prerequisites that go up to 6th grade. And so what will happen is a student can go, and a teacher could administer, tell the student, take the course challenge, which is a summative of everything in the get ready for grade level course. If the student gets a 90%, 95%, they're ready for 6th grade, and then they can start learning at their own time and pace in 6th grade. That student got through COVID just okay. If a student's getting a 30%, a 40%, a 50% on the get ready for 6th grade course, that means they have substantial gaps from probably 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. But what's cool about the get ready for grade level course, it's not just some assessment. You then can see which units you missed from, and then go into those units and then master those concepts. And so for a teacher that sees those kids with those massive gaps, and maybe if the whole class has massive gaps like that, spend the first month or two of school getting students filling in those gaps. Or if you really need to get to the grade level material, have them do it in parallel, so that those gaps aren't persistent the rest of their life. That, I think, is going to be especially in math, going to be the most important thing to recover.
I have a question here, a very specific question. Have you studied what the optimum number of exercises per concept is, and how this number affects motivation? Is there a way we can choose a number of exercises per topic?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what we do know, and unfortunately I'll have to run right after this question. So we've actually have run models on how much evidence do we need to then believe that if you were to give someone another item, especially, and not just that item where you're just focused on that skill, but an item like that in a mixed context setting. So the student also has to figure out which skill is being assessed. And what do they have to show us to believe that if we showed it to them again, there's a 90% chance of them being able to answer it correctly? And what we've generally seen, and our current mastery system is based on this, is if students are able to do roughly 4 or 5 questions, and it depends on the skill, but for most of it they do, let's call it 5 to 7 questions. If they're able to get about 80% of that, that's kind of a first level of mastery. It's not that enduring, but we call that a familiar state. If they're able to then do that same skill in kind of a mixed context setting, then and they're already familiar, we promote them to what we call proficient. And then if they're able to then, once they're proficient, again do that skill in kind of a more summative unit test or a course challenge, we promote them all the way to mastery. And we have a lot of evidence that we did from 8-9 years ago that then the student has a very high probability of having retained it. Now, on top of that, we do spaced repetition, where we have these things called mastery challenges, where something that you've already mastered for, say, a month or 2 ago, you might see again. And, as you know, in spaced repetition research, the more, once you see it, then you're likely to retain it for twice as long. And so on and so forth. So, and that's something that the traditional system actually doesn't do that well, which is make sure you retain things from past lessons or even past years. So, that's our sense. And, what a lot of folks don't realize, the reason why our practice is so resource intensive for us is that we don't just, let's say there's a concept, we don't just write 5 questions and just put it online. That's what, frankly, most people do. We have a bank of about 30 items for just that one sub skill. And, so for a unit, we have on the order of several hundreds of items the student will not do several hundred items. The student for that unit will probably do 30 or 40 items. But the reason why we have several hundred is that students get as many shots at goal as necessary. So they get as much practice and feedback, which, if you don't have a deep item bank, it's very hard to do, true mastery learning. Oh, you're muted, Martin.
Thank you so much for your time. It was really great. Had a lot of detail. We have a very large effort going in Brazil from the Lemon Center to change teacher training in Brazil, because a lot of the things you talk about, teachers don't know how to do. So in the future, I hope that we can let you know about that and maybe do some stuff together. So it was great. Thanks a lot. And let's get your article into that Brazilian newspaper.
Great. We'll figure that out.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you very much.
Thank you.